Okay, welcome back. Section 13, Karen Armstrong, her anthology chapter in her book The Buddha on the Buddha's Enlightenment for this Edexcel A-level paper 4 in Buddhism anthology work. So we read it and we look at it. We do not know how long it took Gautama to recover his health after his years of asceticism. The scriptures speed up the process to make it more dramatic and give the impression that Gautama was ready for the final struggle with himself after one bowl of junket. This cannot have been true. The effects of mindfulness and the cultivation of skillful states take time. Gautama himself said that it could take at least 7 years, and stressed that the new self developed imperceptibly over a long period, just as the ocean slopes gradually falls away gradually, the shells gradually with no sudden incline. He later warned his disciples, so in this method, training, discipline and practice take effect by slow degrees, with no sudden perception of the ultimate truth. The texts show that Gautama attaining his supreme enlightenment and becoming a Buddha in a single night, because they were less concerned with historical fact than with tracing the general contours of the process of achieving release and inner peace. Okay, in this section 13, let's start with this first sentence. We do not know how long it took Gautama to recover from his health after years of asceticism. Do we? How do we know? Anytime someone makes an assertion, question it. How do we know, Armstrong? You need to tell us. What she betrays here is more about Armstrong than about the Buddha. Again, we see Armstrong's both her purpose and her bias coming through here very strong. Her historical, critical, religious studies approach. Her view that her audience is secular, and that by that I mean not just atheist but pluralist, and perhaps some agnostics. And is this distorting the Buddha's life and his enlightenment? Yes, I think it is. Here we have the classic debate between the Jesus of history, the Christ of faith, that resulted from historical, critical, post-Kantian religious studies scholarship. Armstrong rejects the Buddha of faith presented in the later dramatized hagiographies of the Buddha's life, and their surprising immediacy, that he leaves after all his years of fasting and immediately has the night of enlightenment. But the view presumes the miraculous cannot happen, and this in the end undermines the whole project. Buddhism is aimed at the supernatural, at Nibbana. It is pantheistic, it's not atheistic. It is particularistic, it has traditions that these stories are grounded in. It is supernaturalistic, and her account of the Buddha undermines all of this. And so we read on. The scriptures speed up the process and make it more dramatic and give the impression that Gautama was ready for the final struggle with himself after one bowl of junket. Let's look at this whole little section here. What if Armstrong is wrong? How does she know they speed up the process? Now, there might be reasons in the scriptures for this. She doesn't disclose those to us. It may be that if you read these scriptures that there are good reasons to suspect that they are speeding up the process. And she may well be right, but she's not making this clear to us. She's assuming what we will read from her writing. She's assuming her audience is secular and pluralistic, and they cannot imagine a world with the supernatural. They have a limited, as the sociologist Charles Taylor talks about, a limited immanent social imaginary. Heaven is there's kind of a glass ceiling. There's nothing transcendent in the world for the modern secularist. And so she creates a modernistic, secularistic, pluralistic Buddha. But this particular Buddha she's creating is unrecognizable to any Eastern reader, be it Theravada or Mahayana Buddha. A little section at the end here, this bowl of rice mentioned here, this rice junket, it just means like a bowl of rice. Well, that's not unusual. That's just in the Shramana movement, these wandering itinerant holy men, these sadhus of India, were considered the stormtroopers. They were of the greatest problem that faced the world in those days, the problem of samsara, and of every life being a life of birth, death, and re-death, I think, as Harvey talks about. Horrible. And these guys were respected. These were the top scientists of the day, looking to escape, find a way out of this horrible condition. The vast majority of people, apart from the elite, who the Brahmins promised special rituals to, only the elite could escape. And so ordinary people looked up to these people, and it's no surprise that the Buddha was given a junket of rice. He would have been offered perhaps many as a Hindu holy man, or a Brahmin holy man, or a Shramana holy man, whichever he might have presented himself as. So this whole next section is just this little sentence here. This is amazing, and this tells us so much about Armstrong. Just when she says all of this cannot have been true. Wow. Why can it not have been true? Is this just her epistemological prejudice, her epistemological imperialism? Is Armstrong smuggling in, without acknowledging her philosophical perspective, her empiricist epistemology, something that perhaps you might agree with? You might be an empiricist, but in not admitting her perspective, her bias, her approach, which is the approach of most people in modern secular society, her account is not without problems. We need to acknowledge that. That it cannot have happened is an a priori claim. She hasn't given any evidence. Why couldn't it have happened? Maybe it was a miracle. And it betrays her assumption of Hume's arguments against miracles, typically that we think miracles cannot happen in the modern world. And this goes back perhaps to Hume, and from Hume to the Enlightenment thinkers like Newton, whose mathematical universe had no room for the supernatural in its mechanisms. Well, maybe miracles cannot happen, maybe they can. But Armstrong is closing down controversy to make her Buddha palatable to Western secular pluralistic people. That's what's important here. The effects of mindfulness. Let's just read this next bit. The effects of mindfulness and the cultivation of skillful states take time. Well, mindfulness we've done quite a bit on. It's part of the way, the Eightfold Path, right awareness in some ways, sometimes it's called. Mindfulness and Theravada Vipassana get kind of smerged together. Mindfulness in Mahayana becomes smerged together with meditation practices that reveal your inner nature, your Buddha nature. But it's this phrase here that I wanted to kind of just look at. It takes time. The cultivation, that's another word, bhavana in Pali. To cultivate meditation is bhavana. Skillful states, we've learned what those skillful states. Maybe it's the 4 Brahma Viharas, the 10 perfections of the Pali Canon, the 6 perfections of the Lotus Sutra. Maybe it's Upya, maybe it's something else. But it takes time. Now, this is a new debate. Suddenism versus gradualism. And it's a debate actually that across both Theravada and Mahayana. There are, in both Theravada and Mahayana, those who argue for suddenism and those who argue for gradualism. It's an interesting debate that she doesn't engage in. Maybe we can be enlightened suddenly. The Buddha suddenly became aware at the dawning of the day of the truth, and he said, "I am awake." But you could argue it took him not just the 4 periods of the night, not just the battle with Mara, but maybe the 6 years of preparation, all gradually led up to this sudden practice. In Mahayana, the suddenism is the momentary awareness of Buddha nature. Think Zen Buddhism. We'll learn more about in the next unit. And the various sudden practices in Zen to wake you up to your Buddha nature. So on. But there's no word of this debate in her writing here. Well, that's the problem. It's a grey, lifeless Buddha, uncontested, uncontroversial. So which side is she siding with? The gradualist rather than the suddenist doctrinary view in the debate? And does her authority make it true as someone who isn't even a Buddhist? She's making an assertion. She's saying it takes time. She's taking a stand on it here, but a whole lot of people don't agree with her and disagree with her that it could happen suddenly. We've gone over the phrase skillful, and so we'll not go over it again. Kusala as a wholesome state of mind, as opposed to an unskillful state of mind, like the 3 poisons, like ignorance, greed, hatred, and so on. We'll move on. Armstrong is making disputable claims, and we need to make sure you say that if you use this section. So, is Armstrong right? Did the Buddha think his teaching was more important than his life? What is being said in this section here about that? Right. If we read on. Gautama himself said it could take at least 7 years. Now, where is that from? 7 years. It could take 7 years. And stressed the new self developed imperceptibly over a long period, just as the ocean slopes down, gradually falls away, gradually in the shells, gradually with no sudden incline. He later warned his disciples, so in this method, training disciples to practice take effect by slow degrees with no sudden perception of the ultimate truth. Sudden perception of the ultimate truth. Now that's one Buddhist statement perhaps attributed to the Buddha, and it does go back to some of the Nikyas, the teachings of the Buddha. But it's not the only statement, and that's what's important here. She's quoting from the Sutta Pitaka here, so it is a Udana 5.5, and it is a passage in the Pali Canon, and of course, the Buddha's enlightenment comes up in the Acts of the Buddha of the 2nd century AD. But she's mashing together different references here. References from the Pali Canon, references perhaps from the Sutta Pitaka. And with these two very different references, some have, is Pali Canon, so it's more authority than the hagiography of the acts of the Buddha. But she doesn't say that. She's mashing them together without showing their relative importance or explaining that to the reader. These texts, look at the way they have equal authority. She doesn't give the importance of these texts or give context. Show the Buddha attaining supreme enlightenment, becoming a Buddha in a single night, because they are less concerned with historical fact than when tracing general contours in the process of releasing inner peace. Aha! So, suddenism. Well, it happened in a single night. How can it be gradual? And if the Buddha's the one we're copying, it happened in... it's the fault of the texts. Now, you can't... Here's the historical, critical bit coming out when it suits her. You can't believe the texts. You can't believe the text when he said it was a single night. You can't believe the texts when it said he went from asceticism to meditation straight away. This is her secular, pluralistic perspective coming through. And even if you agree with her, you have to recognize it's a bias. It's a modern Western perspective that would not be understood in an Eastern frame of thinking. For Armstrong, the goal, she doesn't recognize the goal is enlightenment. And that's the key here. The goal is enlightenment. And that the Buddha claimed that his life was not as important as his teaching is, of course, absolutely key here. There is no gospel, there is no biography of the Buddha in the Pali Canon. Nanamoli in his book is another named scholar, English scholar.